ProCalcs University. We are the missing piece. In this video, we're going to discuss equipment selection, but we're going to start with Manual S, which allows us to understand why or how we need to select the specific equipment based on the loads of the building that we're using. Now, one thing that's very important to know is to make sure that all of your internal loads in your building are correct, making sure that your windows are properly set, making sure that your head heights, your width and your height, your blinds, any overhangs, also making sure that any internal loads are proper. So if you have any additional appliances or things in the bedrooms or laundry room based on our training or anything else, kitchen loads, you want to make sure that your loads are 100%. And the reason being is when we go ahead and open up our project summary sheet, and I also like to open up my Manual S sheet, I can look at all the values and make sure that my total gain, which my total gain is the total BTUs per hour of air conditioning that's required to properly condition the home during the peak of the day at the peak temperature, which for this location, Tampa, was 91 degrees based on our weather location, and 43 degrees dry bulb outside during the winter conditions. So based on that, it tells us that we need 19,643 for the total load. Then we have our sensible load, which is what changes the thermostat, the temperature up and down. And then our latent, which is our humidity control. So if we do not have the correct loads in the building, these numbers will be incorrect, and the equipment that you select will be incorrect. So once we have that information, we also need to understand what Manual S is. Now, Manual S is a process that allows us to look at the location, whether it's in the tip of Miami, Florida, or all the way up in Washington. If you think about it, those are going to be different climate conditions. They're going to be more humidity, less humidity, lower temperature, higher temperature, higher altitudes, lower altitudes. And if you think about it, devices just like you and I, they're not going to work the same if they're in a different altitude, different humidity levels, and so on. Now, when we look at ARI, which is Air Conditioning, Heating, Refrigeration Institute, they're a third-party company that takes the manufacturer's equipment and retests it to ensure that what the manufacturer says that that product gets, that it actually does get to help protect the consumer. However, to keep it in a controlled test environment, they test it at a specific 95-degree outside temperature, 75-degree inside temperature. There's no fluctuation. They test it at the same elevation all the time. So it is a standard, regardless of whether we're in Washington State or in Miami, Florida, that piece of equipment, according to AHRI, is going to get the exact same BTU capacity and SEER rating. Well, we know that not to be true. So the building codes and ACA, Air Conditioning Contractors Association, has come up with the concept of Manual S, which is equipment selection. And it allows us to look at a bunch of different factors. And here's the actual page out of the Manual S book. Yes, there's an entire book on Manual S. And it allows us to look at the different factors to see where and what we're allowed to do based on it. Now, this may look a little intimidating, but once you read through it in training, you'll understand a little bit better. But it allows us to understand where our latent capacities need to be, where our total capacities need to be, where our sensible capacities need to be, and what our parameters are, how low or how high we can go before that product then becomes not a good match. Now, RightSoft has that capacity. So once we know what our values are, we can then utilize RightSoft or the other tools to find the piece of equipment that matches specifically. It's very important that you do understand, and here's a quick cheat sheet that I've put into the new designer training folder that allows you to kind of walk through the steps. You know, what are the design conditions? Where's the location? Is it in Florida? Is it in Miami? Is it in New York? Is it in Maine? Where is that located? And where it talks about the table here, this is where the weather location in RightSoft comes in and is very important. So it's very important when you select the weather location that you select the proper state and the closest weather data location to that city. Okay. Also, you want to make sure you choose the 1% because that's what ASHRAE and Energy Star. However, there are some municipalities that require a different number. So we have to be careful, but the standard is the 1%, and for heating dry bulb, we do it at the 99%. And we always want to make sure that the most recent ASHRAE number is available. And as you can see, every 3 to 4 years, they update and change those numbers. So if that is correct, then that's going to give you the proper elevation, longitude, latitude. It's also going to give you the proper outdoor temperature during the peak. And it's also going to give you the proper heating temperature during the colder peak. Now that doesn't mean, if you click on the bin data, that does not mean that it does not get a little hotter, and it does not mean that it does not get a little colder than that. However, we don't want to oversize the system for 1 hour in May that it might be 95 to 99 degrees, or in June for 2 hours. And if we stay between 90 and 94, typically the system that we're going to select will be able to handle those conditions between 90 and 94 without having to go to a larger size. And that'd be something that you can experiment with in your projects by modifying the outdoor temperature slightly to see how many degrees you have to go above and the outside temperature before it affects the cooling load. So very important that you know that. So that's what it's talking about when it goes here for your tables. But you want to read through this and you want to understand, and then it references over here to help you get an idea of what each of these letters are referring to. So what we're doing is we're going through and we're making sure that we have the correct location and that we have the right equipment, and it gets into more details that talks about adjusting our fan speeds. Now when we have equipment, we want to make sure that we're adjusting our fan speed based on our manufacturer's data. So when we go to our fan product data performance and we have our fan speeds, as you can see here, which would be based on the static pressure, and the static pressure, as we've discussed, is a matter of how tight the ductwork is. So the smaller I make the ductwork, the harder it is for that air to blow through, and depending on the air handler, it will reduce or increase the amount of air flowing through that space. So when we select the proper air handler and the proper static pressure based on our duct system, they're going to tell us what that manufacturer says at that static pressure, at this speed tap, which is what number they're going to put in the air handler where they put their wire with that air handler, how many CFMs most likely that air handler is going to produce. And we need to be careful of what we put there for those numbers, because think about it. The faster and more air we blow across a colder surface, the warmer the air comes out the other side. As we slow that air down across that surface, we have cooler air. So if we want to increase the temperature difference across that, we lower the fan speed. If we want to increase the temperature difference across that, we raise the fan speed. So when you're looking at your Manual S data, it's going to talk about that. So very important to know. And then, as I said, here is the actual book out of Manual S, which between the two of them, they're a little difficult to read, but it'll be easy for you to go back in and take a look at that information. So very important that you understand and learn your Manual S. The nice thing about RightSoft is RightSoft and a lot of its equipment selection has equipment that's labeled in red that has Manual S data already supported from the manufacturer listed in here. So for instance, if we were going to do a carrier system, and let's say this was the equipment that we were going to use, notice that it's in red and it says that it has the Manual S, but it says this current system does not meet Manual S requirements. And what that means, when we click OK and apply, and we go over here to our performance tab, what it did is Manual S from the manufacturer taking, as you can see here, taking all of these factors into play, what the outside temperatures are, what the CFMs are, latent capacity. They've already told us exactly what that piece of equipment, how it's going to function in that environment. However, as you can see, when we click on these three dots, Here is what our manual S says that equipment is capable of doing, but here is what we actually need in order to properly condition that space. And as you can see, we come up very short. So understanding what manual S is the very first part of the equation. Is if you do not understand the why behind it, it's going to be very difficult for you to choose equipment. Okay, and this is our first part of our series on equipment selection.